and welcome to Dialogue. In a recent article written by former Prime Minister of France, Dominique de Villepin, he states that despite the current tensions around the world, a world war is not inevitable and emphasizes the importance of diplomacy and strategic recalibration to navigate the complexity of international relations. With this in mind, how should powers like China and France play a role to prevent a global disaster? And how will the current U.S. policy aimed at suppressing China's growth affect world peace and stability? In the first half of our program, I'm glad to talk with former French Prime Minister Dominique de Villepin. In the second half, I'll speak to Professor Chung In-moon, James Lally Distinguished Professor at Yonsei University in South Korea. Professor Moon is the former Special Advisor of National Security and Foreign Affairs to President Moon Jae-in. He'll share with us his views on the trilateral relationship between China, South Korea, and Japan, as well as Washington's influence on ties between Beijing and Seoul. Join us for our discussion today from Beijing. I'm Xu Qianduo. Welcome to Dialogue, Mr. de Villepin. Chinese President Xi Jinping was in France, in May. Look back now, how significant, how big an event that is in terms of China-France relationship there?
Well, as you know, China and France have a long partnership. General de Gaulle in 1964 was the first country in Europe to open up diplomatic relationship with China, and it was really a vision that he had, or a more balanced world. He believed that recognizing the strengths and the presence of China was something natural and normal. That was part of his realistic approach of international relations. Of course, this choice of China has been very structuring for French diplomacy, believing that the world needs balance, the world needs a multipolar strategy. And you remember the visit of President Macron in China and the visit of President Xi in Europe and in France, at the first country he visited. This was important for all of us because we see a world that is torn apart. War in Ukraine, war in Gaza, strong logic of confrontation between China and the US. We don't have, as we had in the past during the Cold War, we don't have all this agreement on trade, we don't have the agreements on military affairs, so we don't have the balance that we used to have, the safety net that we used to have. So it's very important to keep close dialogue, close link, close capacity in working together. When you look at all the challenges we are facing, peace in the world, when you look at the challenges of environmental issues, global warming,
right.
Of course, we have been working very closely during all the COPs. France and China have been taking a lead and trying to find a common language in order to support the movement of the world community, to give to the global south a better capacity to fight against this global warming and to have their own tools, needing financing for such a policy. And in many other areas, we see today that globalization is at stake. And more and more, we see protectionism growing around the world. So all these puzzling factors are increasing the necessity of our dialogue, of our global partnership. We have between China and France a strategic partnership, which is of course very much needed facing such many tensions.
Mm-hmm. Speak of the tensions, I think you wrote a piece recently about the global situation. You said, I quote, the era of Pax Americana is ending, leaving the world in a state of great disorder. And you also noted that rarely has the world been as combustible and dangerous as it is today. Tell us more about that. I think in 2014, in a speech, you also mentioned the world was dangerous. Say, it's more dangerous today?
Yes, if you remember in the 90s, we used to say that there was the US as a hyperpower, unilateral capacity of mastering the difficulties of the world. And then came 2001, 9/11, and everything changed, and the US unfortunately had this stand, this belief that they could monitor the different crises through force, through regime change, through unilateral action. And we have had Afghanistan, we had Iraq, and then afterwards we had Syria, Libya, and so on. And we have seen that force cannot solve the difficulties of our world. In order to face those difficulties, we should be able to support international law. In the case of Ukraine, we have had the use of force by Russia against Ukraine. We should defend integrity and the sovereignty of Ukraine. The same in Gaza, and that's where many criticism of the Global South is due to the fact that they understand that for the Western world, there is two different laws depending on where the crisis happens. In the Western world, it's one international law, and in the South, Global South, like in Gaza, a different one. We should unify our stance. I think there is today in our world an aspiration for justice, a very strong aspiration for justice. We see that in the Middle East for Palestine. There is also a very strong demand of equality. And I think the big powers of today, the members of the Security Council, they have a special duty in getting together and trying to find a common language, a common action in order to solve the problem of the world. You see, one of the big difficulties today in international affairs, and I do say that as a diplomat, is many countries and many people around the world, they have the feeling that diplomacy is not able anymore to cure the crisis and difficulties of the world. They have a feeling of powerlessness. They have the feeling that diplomats cannot negotiate actively enough, efficiently enough, to be able to stop wars, to end crises, to find common dialogues and solutions. And that's where is the challenge. And that's where I believe countries like China, France, that do have a historical, specific responsibility. We should be every day more active. In Ukraine, in the Middle East, I was very happy to see the special role that China had in having Saudi Arabia and Iran having back a dialogue, diplomatic relation. I think that is very important for the stability, the balance of the Middle East. You see, the logic of crisis is that crises are contagious. There is a logic of epidemic. Instability never stops if you don't take the right stands and the right decisions. And that's where I believe countries with experience, countries that are profoundly dedicated to peace and stability, need to work even harder today to stop this phenomena.
I think another element, another factor contributing to this global instability or disorder might be, say, a relationship between U.S. and China, Washington, Beijing. We know Washington has been basically pursuing a China policy, which is seen as more or less hostile, let's say. Some people say this is a containment, others say this is a new Cold War. Anyway, what we are seeing is the U.S. is trying hard to slow down the economic growth or the tech growth in China. Speak of justice, how justifiable is that? What is the proper way of the two powers probably to deal with each other?
It is normal that these two superpowers are going to have frictions, tensions. This is part of the logic of the world. The question is, on economy, for the world economy, how much can we support the idea that the whole world will go protectionist? How much this is going to have consequences, not only for our economies, the developed economies, but also for the emerging world. The global south is going to suffer a lot if all the biggest economies are going to close themselves, protectionism is going to gain, everyone is going to build walls just to create new influence zone. We're going to see at the end of the day a partition, a division of globalization. I don't think at the end of the day this is good for neither. The US are dependent of the world economy. They are dependent also of the Chinese economy. China needs the world economy, needs globalization.
Exactly.
So we all need a better globalization. And I think this is something we should be able to discuss between us, how to create a fair globalization. And I believe if you think things over, a fair globalization is a globalization where the biggest actors, the developed actors, may have the same tools, the same rules, and be able to be reciprocal. Reciprocity should be the key word for the new globalization. And that's why I was very happy to hear President Xi today in his speech on the 5 principles of Pacific coexistence saying that he wants to have the Chinese economy opening up. He wants to have China more into the respect of the private market. I think these are important elements of the equation if we want to find, all of us, our place into the globalization. You see, the fact that Europe today feels they are more losing from globalization than gaining makes the people of Europe fearful. And that's why populism is growing. So if we can find the right pace, we could alleviate those worries. Second now, there is another aspect for this logic of confrontation, which is not economic, which is strategic, which is a matter of influence. It is a matter of who is going to be number one in the current century. And we know, of course, that China has all the capacity to be the next number one. I think we should take back the lessons of the former Cold War. After the Second World War, we decided to create common rules. We decided to have the UN Charter and the UN principles and the 5 principles of the Pacific coexisting as an element ruling the life between us on a strategic basis, on a military basis, in order to avoid any accident, any adventure, any risk for the world community. We should go back to that. And I think on the agenda of the diplomats of the whole world, we need to work on what should be the new rules of the coming decade. What should be the new way in dealing together. And that's where we need wise leaders. We need leaders with experience. We need leaders that are able to dialogue and to know each other better. I was happy when President Xi, coming in France, came to visit President Macron in the family of, in his own family. That's a way for leaders to understand one another and to share more about their understanding and how they want to make things. I think the world needs more of this capacity of dialogue, sharing experience, sharing dialogue.
Thank you, Mr. de Villepin.
Thank you so much for
speaking with
receiving
us.
me.